Betio Island, Tarawa Atoll, November 20, 1943, 0515 hours. Commander Keiji Shibasaki stands atop his reinforced concrete command bunker watching the pre-dawn darkness over the lagoon, and he cannot reconcile the American confidence in attacking his fortress with the reality of what awaits them on these beaches. Shibasaki, a veteran of China and Malaya, has spent the last 14 months transforming this coral atoll into what Japanese Naval Command calls the most heavily fortified 2 square miles in the Pacific, 500 reinforced concrete pillboxes, bunkers with walls 4 feet thick, interlocking fields of fire covering every inch of beach, and 4,500 Imperial Japanese Navy troops trained to fight to the death. What Commander Shibasaki cannot possibly know, what no Japanese officer could imagine even in their worst nightmares, is that within 48 hours, U.S. Marines will stand atop his command bunker raising the American flag, having demolished defenses he promised could not be taken in 100 years. And within those 2 days, the tactical innovations developed by the Marine Corps, flamethrowers that turn concrete bunkers into crematoriums, demolition teams that blow fortress walls apart like cardboard, and a combined arms coordination so precise it seems almost mechanical, will shatter Japanese defensive doctrines so completely that every subsequent Pacific battle will be fought under the shadow of what happens here. The Japanese military's confidence in fortress defense comes from experience, from the belief that properly constructed fortifications with determined defenders become nearly impossible to assault, from calculations showing that entrenched troops inflict casualties at ratios of 10 to 1 against attacking forces. Captain Tadao Oda, commanding the southern defensive sector, has personally supervised construction of interconnected bunkers that allow defenders to retreat through tunnels when one position becomes untenable, emerging in adjacent fortifications to continue fighting. He knows the Americans have tried frontal assaults before: Guadalcanal, New Georgia, Bougainville, battles where Japanese defenses extracted terrible costs even in defeat. Oda expects the coming assault to follow the same pattern: Americans landing under devastating fire, establishing precarious beachheads, then spending weeks grinding through defenses in costly infantry battles. The construction of Betio's defenses represents Japanese military engineering at its most sophisticated, born from lessons learned in China where fortified positions proved nearly impossible to reduce without artillery that could pulverize concrete. Lieutenant Hiroshi Nomura, the engineering officer who designed much of Betio's defensive system, has created a masterpiece of military architecture: bunkers with reinforced concrete roofs topped with coconut logs and coral sand to absorb artillery impacts, firing ports positioned to create interlocking fields of fire that leave no dead space on the beaches, and underground tunnel networks allowing defenders to move between positions without exposure to enemy fire. The construction consumed 14 months, thousands of tons of concrete shipped from Japan, and the labor of Korean forced workers who built structures designed to kill the Americans attempting to storm them. The defensive positions themselves demonstrate understanding of amphibious warfare refined through years of Pacific combat. Sergeant Isamu Nakamura, commanding a beach defense position, occupies a bunker whose walls measure 4 feet of reinforced concrete, thick enough to withstand direct hits from naval gunfire up to 8 inches in caliber. The firing ports, barely wide enough for a machine gun barrel, provide minimal exposure while commanding sweeping views of the beach approaches. Behind his primary position, Nakamura can retreat through tunnels to 3 alternate fighting positions, each commanding different sectors of the beach. The system allows a handful of defenders to hold off hundreds of attackers by moving between positions as assault forces attempt to flank or suppress them. The beach obstacles represent another layer of defensive sophistication that Japanese planners believe will doom the American assault before it reaches shore. Wooden stakes driven into the coral at angles calculated to rip the bottoms from landing craft, concrete tetrahedrons positioned to create obstacles at low tide, barbed wire entanglements stretching across the beaches like metallic spider webs, all designed to channel attacking forces into predetermined killing zones where machine guns and artillery have pre-registered firing coordinates. Commander Shibasaki personally inspected these obstacles, calculating that they would delay American forces long enough for his gunners to inflict catastrophic casualties before the Marines could establish a foothold. What makes November 20, 1943. Different from every previous amphibious assault in history is not immediately apparent to the Japanese defenders who have prepared for conventional infantry attacks supported by naval gunfire. What they cannot see approaching in the pre-dawn darkness is a fundamentally transformed Marine Corps that has analyzed every previous amphibious failure, identified solutions to every defensive advantage, and created an assault doctrine that treats fortresses not as impregnable obstacles but as engineering problems with violent solutions. The development of specialized assault equipment transforms Marines from conventional infantry into fortress breakers carrying weapons specifically designed to destroy concrete and steel. Corporal James Richardson, waiting in his Amtrak loaded with flamethrower fuel and demolition charges, represents a new kind of warrior, trained not to suppress enemy fire but to eliminate it completely, carrying weapons that can kill defenders inside bunkers that artillery cannot penetrate. Richardson's M2 flamethrower, capable of projecting burning napalm 40 yards, can reach through firing ports that rifles cannot hit, turning defensive positions into ovens that cook defenders alive regardless of how thick the concrete walls protecting them. The flamethrower development represents American industrial innovation applied to the specific problem of bunker warfare. Private First Class Thomas Garcia, assigned to a demolition team, carries satchel charges containing 20 pounds of C2 explosive, plastic explosive that can be shaped to blow through concrete walls or drop through ventilation shafts to destroy bunkers from inside. The charges, fitted with fuses that give attackers enough time to take cover, deliver explosive force concentrated precisely where it will do maximum damage. Combined with Bangalore's, long tubes filled with explosives designed to blow gaps through barbed wire, the demolition equipment gives Marines capabilities that Japanese defenders never anticipated. The Marine Corps assault doctrine that will demolish Betio's defenses in 48 hours represents years of tactical evolution, analysis of amphibious failures, and brutal training that prepares men for the most dangerous combat in warfare, attacking entrenched defenders on their chosen ground. Major General Julian Smith, commanding the 2nd Marine Division, has drilled his men relentlessly in combined arms tactics that coordinate infantry, armor, artillery, and naval gunfire to create violence so overwhelming that even the most determined defenders cannot withstand it. The tank infantry coordination proves particularly revolutionary, transforming isolated infantry squads into combined arms teams that can reduce fortifications systematically. Staff Sergeant Michael O'Brien, leading an assault team, works with a Sherman tank whose 75mm gun and machine guns can suppress enemy positions while his infantry approaches with flamethrowers and demolitions. The tank provides mobile cover that allows infantry to advance under fire, its armor protecting them from machine gun bullets that would cut down unsupported troops. When the tank encounters a bunker too strong for its weapons, O'Brien's demolition men rush forward to place charges that blow the position apart, allowing the advance to continue. The communication systems that coordinate this violence represent another American advantage that Japanese defenders cannot match. Sergeant Robert Martinez, carrying a portable radio that weighs 38 pounds, can call for naval gunfire, artillery support, or airstrikes with precision that turns the entire American arsenal into his personal weapon system. When his squad encounters a concrete bunker that resists flamethrowers and demolitions, Martinez radios coordinates to a naval gunfire liaison officer who directs a destroyer's 5-inch guns onto the target with accuracy measured in yards rather than hundreds of yards. The integration of firepower from sea, air, and land creates combined violence that Japanese defensive planning never anticipated. The first indication Commander Shibasaki has that something unprecedented is about to happen comes when the naval bombardment begins at 0544 hours, not the scattered, ineffective fire that Japanese doctrine expects from naval guns firing at land targets, but a systematic pounding that targets specific fortifications identified through aerial reconnaissance and submarine periscope observations. The USS Maryland's 16-inch shells, each weighing 2,700 pounds, hammer Shibasaki's command bunker with impacts that shake the coral island like earthquakes, while destroyers methodically work through a target list that suggests the Americans know exactly where every defensive position is located. But the naval gunfire, while impressive, merely softens defenses that Japanese engineers designed to withstand bombardment. Captain Oda, emerging from his bunker after the guns shift targets, finds his positions battered but intact, firing ports still commanding the beaches, machine guns still ready, defenders shaken but functional. He radios Shibasaki that his sector remains combat effective, ready to inflict the catastrophic casualties that Japanese defensive doctrine promises. What Oda cannot see is the wave of LVT Amtraks approaching the reef, tracked landing vehicles that can cross the coral barrier where conventional landing craft will ground out, carrying Marines who will hit his beaches at points and in numbers that his defensive calculations never anticipated. The first Marines ashore at 0910 hours discover immediately that Japanese defensive fire remains devastating despite the bombardment. Machine guns sweep the beaches, artillery rounds explode among the Amtraks, mortar fire falls with accuracy suggesting pre-registered coordinates. Private William Davis, hit twice before reaching the seawall, watches half his platoon cut down in the first minutes ashore. The Japanese defensive system works exactly as designed. Interlocking fields of fire leave no safe spaces, defenders firing from positions that are nearly invisible, a killing ground that seems to validate every Japanese calculation about fortress defense. What transforms the stalled assault into breakthrough requires tactics that Japanese defenders have never encountered and cannot counter. Corporal Richardson, crawling forward with his flamethrower team while tank fire suppresses a bunker aperture, reaches a position where he can direct his weapons stream through the firing port. The pressurized napalm, burning at 2000 degrees, fills the bunker interior with flames that consume oxygen faster than men can breathe it. The defenders have three choices: burn alive, suffocate, or flee through the rear exit where Marines waiting with rifles cut them down. Richardson's flamethrower eliminates a position that would have required hours of conventional assault and dozens of casualties to reduce. The demolition teams prove equally devastating when properly employed. Private Garcia, approaching a concrete bunker from its blind side while covering fire pins defenders inside, places a satchel charge against the wall, lights the fuse, and sprints for cover. The explosion blows a hole through 4 feet of reinforced concrete, the overpressure killing everyone inside without Marines ever exposing themselves to defensive fire. What would have required sustained artillery bombardment or costly frontal assault is reduced to a 2-minute demolition job by men trained specifically for fortress warfare. The tank infantry teams develop a brutal efficiency as they learn which tactics work against which fortifications. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Swensky, commanding a Sherman tank, discovers that high-explosive rounds fired at close range into bunker apertures create overpressure that kills defenders inside even when the shells don't penetrate. His tank becomes a moving fortress that infantry use as mobile cover, advancing under its protection until close enough to employ flamethrowers or demolitions. When Japanese defenders try to attack the tank with magnetic mines or satchel charges, Marine infantry shoot them down before they can close, a combined arms partnership that multiplies the effectiveness of both elements. By the end of the first day, Commander Shibasaki begins recognizing that his carefully designed defensive system is failing in ways that doctrine never predicted. The Americans are not conducting frontal infantry assaults that his machine guns can massacre, but instead are using specialized weapons and tactics that neutralize his concrete fortifications. Positions that engineers calculated could hold for weeks are being reduced in hours by flamethrower teams that kill defenders without damaging the structures. His communication system, telephone lines buried for protection, is being cut by naval gunfire and tank fire, isolating strongpoints that were designed to support each other. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders proves as devastating as the physical destruction. Sergeant Nakamura, watching his neighboring positions eliminated one by tactics he has no training to counter, realizes that the defensive advantage he counted on has evaporated. The Americans are not obligingly attacking into his machine gun fire but instead are using tanks for cover, calling down artillery and naval gunfire on his position whenever he fires, and approaching with weapons, flamethrowers and satchel charges, that kill him regardless of how thick his bunker walls are. The confidence that months of preparation created is replaced by growing recognition that his position, like all the others, is doomed. The reserve positions that Japanese doctrine counts on to counterattack and restore broken defensive lines never materialize because American firepower interdicts any movement. Lieutenant Nomura, attempting to move reinforcements forward to plug a breakthrough, watches as naval gunfire called by Marine forward observers obliterates his troops before they can reach the fighting. The mobility that Japanese defensive planning assumes, ability to shift reserves, reinforce threatened sectors, counterattack penetrations, proves impossible under the weight of American firepower that seems omnipresent and responsive to any Japanese movement. By the evening of November 21, just 33 hours after the first Marines landed, Commander Shibasaki must confront a reality that shatters every assumption about fortress defense. His impregnable positions are falling not slowly through grinding attrition but rapidly through systematic reduction by American tactics specifically developed to crack them. The southern defensive sector has collapsed completely, Marines now fighting through positions that were supposed to require weeks to capture. His command bunker, designed to withstand any bombardment, is surrounded by Marines who have blown through subsidiary positions that were supposed to protect it. The final assault on Shibasaki's command post demonstrates the evolution of Marine assault tactics that occurred during the battle itself. Rather than costly frontal assault, Marines use a combination of demolitions to seal exits, flamethrowers to make the interior uninhabitable, and finally satchel charges placed in ventilation shafts to eliminate anyone who survives the flames. The bunker that engineers promised could not be taken becomes a tomb for its defenders within an hour of Marines reaching it. Shibasaki dies not in dramatic combat but suffocated in a position that doctrine insisted was invulnerable. The final organized resistance ends at 1,312 hours on November 22, 48 hours after the first landing craft hit the reef. What was supposed to be a fortress requiring months to reduce has fallen in 2 days to tactics that treat concrete bunkers and interlocking fields of fire not as insurmountable obstacles but as engineering problems with violent solutions. The cost to the Marines, over 3,000 casualties including 1,000 dead, seems catastrophic by previous standards. But Japanese defenders, who numbered 4,500, have been almost completely annihilated with only 17 prisoners taken from the original garrison. The speed of Betio's fall shocks not just Japanese defenders but American planners who expected far longer campaigns. What the battle demonstrates is that proper application of specialized weapons, combined arms tactics, and overwhelming firepower can reduce fortifications that conventional infantry assaults would require weeks or months to capture. The flamethrower, viewed skeptically by many commanders before Tarawa, proves so effective that it becomes standard equipment for every Marine assault unit. The demolitions techniques, refined under fire, become doctrine taught to every Marine rifleman. The Japanese military's response to Tarawa reveals the psychological impact of watching fortress defenses fail so completely. Imperial General Headquarters issues reports analyzing the battle, concluding that static defenses, no matter how well constructed, cannot withstand American firepower and specialized assault tactics. Future Japanese defenses will emphasize depth rather than beach fortifications, caves rather than concrete bunkers, and defense in depth rather than holding beach lines. The change represents complete abandonment of the defensive doctrine that built Betio's fortifications. The survivors of Betio's garrison, the handful who were too severely wounded to commit suicide or resist to the death, describe the assault in terms that emphasize the shocking effectiveness of American tactics. Corporal Tadashi Yamamoto, one of 17 prisoners taken from 4,500 defenders, reports that the Americans fought like machines, using tactics that left no opportunity for the desperate close-quarters combat where Japanese training provided advantage. The flamethrowers particularly haunted survivors' accounts, weapons that killed without honor, without allowing defenders to sell their lives dearly through close combat. The cost-benefit analysis of Tarawa proves controversial in American media, with some questioning whether a coral atoll was worth 3,000 casualties. But military professionals recognize that the tactical lessons learned, how to crack fortress defenses, how to coordinate combined arms and assault, how to employ specialized weapons, make every subsequent amphibious assault more efficient. The techniques refined at Tarawa will be applied at Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, each time with improvements that reduce casualties while increasing assault effectiveness. The tactical revelations from Tarawa spread through the Marine Corps with urgency born from recognizing that every future Pacific battle will require the same fortress-breaking capabilities. Major General Holland Smith, commanding Fleet Marine Force Pacific, convenes conferences where Tarawa veterans demonstrate flamethrower techniques, demolition procedures, and tank infantry coordination to units preparing for subsequent operations. Captain Louis Burwell, who led assault teams through Betio's defenses, teaches classes where he emphasizes that fortifications are not obstacles to avoid but targets to systematically destroy using specific weapons and tactics. The flamethrower employment doctrine undergoes complete revision as the Marine Corps recognizes this weapon's decisive impact against fortified positions. Technical Sergeant Harold Schreier, training new flamethrower operators at Camp Pendleton, teaches techniques refined under fire at Tarawa, approaching bunkers from angles that prevent defenders from targeting the operator, using terrain features for cover during approach, coordinating with rifle squads who suppress firing ports while the flamethrower man closes distance. The training emphasizes that flamethrowers are not area weapons but precision tools for eliminating specific fortifications that other weapons cannot reduce. The demolition training becomes equally sophisticated as Marines recognize that every infantryman must understand basic bunker-busting techniques. Gunnery Sergeant Michael Strank, conducting demolition school at Camp Tarawa in Hawaii, teaches Marines to read fortification construction, identifying structural weak points, recognizing ventilation systems that provide access to interiors, understanding how to calculate explosive charges needed to penetrate different thicknesses of concrete. The curriculum treats fortress assault as engineering problem-solving under fire, requiring both technical knowledge and courage to apply it within yards of enemy positions. The invasion of Saipan in June 1944 provides the first opportunity to apply Tarawa's lessons against Japanese defenses that have evolved in response to that defeat. Lieutenant Colonel Takashi Hirakushi, commanding defensive positions in Saipan's mountainous interior, has studied Tarawa's fall and designed fortifications specifically to counter American tactics, caves instead of concrete bunkers, positions with multiple entrances and exits preventing Marines from sealing defenders inside, interconnected tunnel systems allowing defenders to retreat and reappear after Americans pass, creating continuous defensive depth rather than static beach positions. But the Marines have evolved equally, developing tactics specifically for cave warfare that prove even more devastating than Tarawa's bunker-breaking techniques. Corporal Franklin Sousley, approaching a cave complex in the Tapachau Massif, employs a method that becomes standard procedure. Marines seal secondary exits with demolitions, then pump flamethrower fuel into the main entrance and ignite it, creating a firestorm that consumes oxygen throughout the tunnel system. Defenders who survive the flames suffocate or are forced to emerge where Marines waiting in ambush positions cut them down. The tank infantry coordination reaches new levels of sophistication on Saipan's varied terrain. Lieutenant Robert Leader, commanding a Sherman tank supporting infantry assault through cane fields, discovers that high-explosive rounds can blast Japanese defenders from cave mouths even when they cannot penetrate the caves themselves. His tank works with infantry in a deadly rhythm. The tank's main gun blasts cave entrances while machine guns suppress any Japanese attempting to fire back. Infantry advances under this covering fire to place demolitions that collapse cave systems, eliminating positions without Marines ever entering the deadly confines where Japanese close combat training provides advantage. The artillery and naval gunfire coordination evolves beyond Tarawa's relatively crude fire support into precision targeting that turns American firepower dominance into a decisive tactical advantage. Forward observer Lieutenant Thomas Mahoney, accompanying assault troops through Saipan's Central Highlands, carries radio equipment allowing him to call fire missions that land within minutes of request. When his company encounters a Japanese strongpoint in Death Valley, Mahoney directs naval 5-inch guns onto coordinates with accuracy measured in yards, demolishing positions that would have required hours of infantry assault and dozens of casualties to reduce through direct action. The Japanese response to Marine assault tactics becomes increasingly desperate as commanders recognize that no defensive system can withstand the combined application of American firepower, specialized weapons, and aggressive tactics. Colonel Kenji Ogata, defending Mount Tapachau's summit, orders his troops to abandon fortified positions at night and conduct infiltration attacks against Marine lines, trading the protection of fortifications for tactical surprise. The attacks achieve some success but at catastrophic cost, as American firepower, including artillery pre-registered on likely infiltration routes, massacres Japanese troops caught in the open. The psychological impact on Japanese troops proves as devastating as physical casualties, as soldiers trained to believe in defensive doctrine watch every fortification type fail against marine assault methods. Private First Class Shigeru Kinjo, surviving the reduction of a cave complex that killed his entire squad, describes American attacks as mechanical and unstoppable, noting that Marines never attempted the frontal infantry charges that Japanese training prepared defenders to repel. Instead, Americans employed standoff weapons, flamethrowers, demolitions, artillery, naval gunfire, that killed defenders without exposing attackers to the close combat where Japanese soldiers could fight effectively. The civilian presence on Saipan adds a tragic dimension absent from Tarawa, as thousands of Japanese civilians choose death over capture based on propaganda claiming Americans would torture and murder them. Marine Corporal Guy Gabaldon, a Japanese-speaking Marine who attempts to convince civilians to surrender, watches families leap from cliffs at Marpy Point rather than accept American assurances of safety. The mass suicides demonstrate propaganda's power but also reflect Japanese military culture's emphasis on death before dishonor, a mentality that ensures garrisons will fight to near annihilation rather than surrender even when defeat becomes inevitable. The September 1944 invasion of Peleliu confronts Marines with Japanese defensive evolution at its most sophisticated, a fortress system designed by Colonel Kunio Nakagawa specifically to counter every American tactic that succeeded at Tarawa and Saipan. Nakagawa abandons beach defenses entirely, instead fortifying Peleliu's central ridges with cave systems so extensive that entire companies can shelter inside mountains while American bombardment wastes ammunition on empty positions. The Umerbergal Ridges, soon nicknamed Bloody Nose Ridge by Marines, present fortress warfare challenges that exceed anything encountered previously. The Marine response demonstrates how thoroughly the Corps has absorbed fortress fighting doctrine, developing new techniques specifically for Peleliu's unique challenges. Captain Everett Pope, commanding K Company 1st Marines, pioneers tactics using rifle grenades and white phosphorus shells to mark cave entrances for supporting weapons, then employing flamethrower teams covered by entire platoons providing suppressive fire. The technique reduces casualties while maintaining offensive momentum, though the coral ridges exact a terrible price. Pope's company suffers 90% casualties in taking positions that Japanese engineers designed to be impregnable. The introduction of armored bulldozers represents American industrial ingenuity applied to battlefield requirements, as engineers discover that caves cannot be cleared with flamethrowers alone but can be permanently sealed by heavy equipment. Sergeant Russell Davis, operating an armored bulldozer under fire, pushes tons of coral and debris into cave entrances, entombing defenders who refuse to surrender. The technique proves brutally effective, eliminating positions that would have required days of fighting to reduce through conventional assault methods. The Japanese military's evolution in response to marine assault tactics demonstrates desperate innovation born from watching every defensive system fail. Lieutenant General Tadamaki Kurabayashi, assigned to defend Iwo Jima after studying reports from Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu, designs a defensive system that assumes American tactics will succeed eventually but aims to extract maximum casualties during the inevitable defeat. Kurabayashi forbids the banzai charges that waste troops, instead ordering defenders to fight from positions until killed, retreat through tunnels to secondary positions, and continue fighting in depth rather than dying in futile counterattacks. The fortifications on Iwo Jima represent the culmination of Japanese defensive engineering, 16 miles of interconnected tunnel allowing movement between positions without surface exposure, firing positions with multiple feet of volcanic rock overhead protecting against naval bombardment, pillboxes disguised to blend with terrain until Marines approach within grenade range. Kurabayashi estimates his 21,000-man garrison can hold Iwo Jima for 2 months against American assault, accepting defeat as inevitable but determined to make victory as costly as possible. The psychological preparation of Japanese troops undergoes transformation as commanders recognize that fortress defense requires different mentality than traditional Japanese martial culture. Major Yoshitaka Hori, preparing troops for Iwo Jima's defense, emphasizes disciplined fire control and tactical patience rather than aggressive spirit and bayonet charges. Troops trained to engage American targets at maximum effective range rather than waiting for close combat, to use connected positions to create continuous defensive lines rather than dying in isolated strongpoints, and to view individual survival as less important than inflicting casualties that might make Americans reconsider their advance across the Pacific. The February 1945 assault on Iwo Jima tests every lesson Marines learned from 3 years of fortress warfare against defenses designed specifically to counter American tactics. The opening bombardment, 3 days of intensive naval gunfire and aerial bombing, appears devastating but accomplishes far less than hoped, as Japanese positions buried under volcanic rock survive impacts that would have destroyed Tarawa's concrete bunkers. When Marines land on February 19, they discover an enemy who learned from every previous defeat to create defensive perfection. Sergeant Michael Strank, leading his squad inland from the beaches, encounters Japanese defensive tactics refined through hard experience, no exposure of defenders to American firepower, firing positions that reveal themselves only when firing, then immediately going silent, creating uncertainty about whether positions are occupied or abandoned. The volcanic ash offers no cover while Japanese positions carved into Mount Suribachi and the Central Highlands command every approach. Strank's experience from 3 previous campaigns tells him this will be the hardest fight yet, an enemy who learned to fight American-style warfare by suffering through it. The flamethrowers prove less immediately decisive on Iwo Jima than on previous islands, as Japanese engineers designed positions with ventilation systems preventing complete oxygen consumption and multiple exits preventing Marines from sealing defenders inside. Corporal Charles Lindbergh, operating a flamethrower against a cave system in the Motoyama Plateau, expends his entire fuel load, 5 minutes of continuous firing, only to watch Japanese defenders emerge from a concealed exit 50 yards away to reoccupy positions after Marines advance. The resilience requires new tactics, using demolitions to collapse tunnel systems rather than merely burning defenders out, coordinating with tanks whose 75mm guns can penetrate cave walls, and accepting that reducing some positions requires days rather than hours. The flag raising on Mount Suribachi after 4 days of combat becomes iconic but represents only the beginning of Iwo Jima's battle, as the Central Highlands contain the main defensive system. Navy Corpsman John Bradley, participating in the famous flag raising, returns to treating casualties from fighting that continues for another month, testimony that symbolic victories mean little when the enemy refuses to acknowledge defeat. The Japanese defensive system forces Marines to reduce positions one by one through methodical application of every fortress fighting technique developed since Tarawa. The casualty figures from Iwo Jima shock even Marine commanders hardened by 3 years of Pacific warfare, 26,000 American casualties including 6,800 dead from 36 days of combat. The Japanese garrison of 21,000 suffers 18,000 dead with only 216 prisoners taken, many of them too severely wounded to commit suicide. The near-total annihilation demonstrates Japanese defensive doctrine's evolution, accepting death as inevitable but ensuring the enemy pays maximum cost for victory. The psychological impact on Marines who survive Iwo Jima proves profound, as veterans recognize they participated in the deadliest battle in Marine Corps history against an enemy who learned from every previous defeat to create near-perfect defense. Private First Class Ira Hayes, one of the Suribachi flag raisers, struggles with survivor's guilt watching friends die reducing fortifications that Japanese troops designed specifically to kill Marines efficiently. The recognition that Japanese defenders knew they would die but fought to inflict maximum casualties before death creates respect mixed with horror at an enemy whose courage cannot be questioned even as their cause deserves condemnation. The strategic debate about Iwo Jima's value, whether the island's airfields justified 26,000 casualties, continues for decades, but tactical professionals recognize that the battle proved fortress warfare's ultimate test. Every technique Marines developed since Tarawa was necessary on Iwo Jima, yet even perfect execution of doctrine resulted in casualties approaching 30% of the assault force. The Japanese proved that determined defenders in well-designed positions can inflict terrible costs even against attackers who do everything correctly. The planned invasion of Japan drives final evolution of Marine assault doctrine as planners contemplate attacking an enemy who will defend their homeland with the same determination shown on Iwo Jima but with resources of an entire nation. The casualty estimates, hundreds of thousands of American dead, reflect recognition that Japanese defenders fighting for their homes will exact costs that might prove politically unsustainable even for a nation committed to unconditional surrender. The weapons development accelerates in response to Iwo Jima's lessons, with engineers creating flame tanks, Shermans equipped with flamethrowers instead of main guns, that can project napalm 100 yards, demolishing fortifications that infantry flamethrowers cannot reach. The M4A3R3 Zippo tank combines armor protection with fortress-destroying firepower, representing American industrial innovation applied to the specific problem of reducing Japanese defenses without exposing infantry to the casualties that frontal assault entails. The atomic bombs that end the war in August 1945 prevent testing whether evolved marine tactics could successfully invade Japan's home islands, but the theoretical planning reveals how thoroughly the Corps integrated fortress warfare doctrine into every aspect of operations. The invasion plans call for unprecedented coordination of naval gunfire, aerial bombardment, artillery, armor, and specialized infantry tactics, essentially applying Iwo Jima's lessons on a continental scale with firepower that would have dwarfed anything previously employed. The Marine Corps that emerges from World War II bears little resemblance to the force that struggled at Tarawa, transformed by 3 years of fortress warfare into combined arms professionals who treat fortifications as engineering problems requiring violent solutions. The flamethrower becomes standard infantry equipment, demolitions training becomes mandatory for every rifleman, and tank infantry coordination becomes doctrine rather than improvisation. The transformation represents organizational learning under the harshest possible conditions, adapt or die, with thousands of casualties providing brutal feedback about which tactics work and which fail. The Japanese military's evolution in response to marine tactics demonstrates that even defeated armies can adapt and learn, though tactical improvement cannot overcome strategic weakness. Each island's defenders fought more effectively than the last, learned from previous defeats to create better fortifications and employ more sophisticated tactics, yet lost anyway because American material superiority and tactical flexibility allowed Marines to counter every defensive innovation. The Japanese proved that courage and tactical skill cannot overcome fundamental disadvantages in firepower, industrial capacity, and ability to learn from mistakes. The fortress warfare techniques pioneered in the Pacific prove applicable to every subsequent conflict involving reducing fortified positions, Korea's bunker complexes, Vietnam's tunnel systems, Iraq's urban warfare, and Afghanistan's cave complexes all face tactics descended directly from marine innovations developed between Tarawa and Iwo Jima. The integration of specialized weapons, combined arms coordination, and systematic reduction procedures becomes standard military doctrine, taught to every infantry unit despite most never facing fortress warfare. The human cost of developing this doctrine, over 25,000 Marines killed learning how to break Japanese fortresses, represents sacrifice that cannot be quantified in tactical manuals or doctrine publications. The survivors carry memories of friends who died testing techniques that later saved other lives, of positions that required multiple assaults before Marines learned the correct approach, of battles that experience made survivable but that killed those who provided that experience. The knowledge was purchased with blood, refined through suffering, and passed forward so that future Marines might face slightly better odds when confronting the next fortress. The story of Japanese infantry shocked by Marines storming fortresses in 48 hours is ultimately a story of innovation under pressure, of tactical evolution driven by desperate necessity, and of an organization that learned faster than its enemy despite paying terrible costs for that education. From Tarawa's concrete bunkers to Iwo Jima's volcanic caves, Marines developed doctrine that treated fortresses not as impregnable obstacles but as problems requiring specific solutions that could be learned, taught, and applied systematically to achieve victory even against enemies fighting for their lives in positions they believed invincible.